Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Wednesday morning. That means it's time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, and I happen to be Chuck Dixon, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And hey, a lot of you have really helped this channel out by subscribing, hitting that old subscribe button. If you have done that, thank you so much. If you haven't, please do, because we're creeping toward 9,000 subscribers. They tell me when I get to 10,000 subscribers, amazing things happen. I mean, the sun rises in the west and it never rains again. Except for money. No, I mean, the more subscribers I have, the more the word of this channel spreads, the more interesting questions we get, the more fans we bring into this community that you helped build. So hit that subscribe button if you get a chance. You know the drill. Just do it. It's free. Okay. Richard Garcia, here's a few questions. What made you a fan of Orphan Annie? And do you have a specific writing schedule, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 1 to 8, etc.? Little Orphan Annie was a strip I read as a kid in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I read all the strips in both the newspapers, the Inquirer and the Bulletin. Never got around to the Daily News, though. We didn't get that paper. It was a rag, my mother said. What got me into Little Orphan Annie in a bigger way, other than just reading it in the daily paper, it was still being drawn by Harold Gray when I was a young man. I bought this book in the early 70s through the Conservative Book Club. Yes, I was a subscriber to National Review, even when I was in junior high. So through the Conservative Book Club, I got this big honking, like 1,500 page collection of Harold Gray continuities from 1935 to 1945. And I just fell in love with the character even more, because these were the great stories set during the Depression and during the Second World War, and the introduction of all of the great cast of characters, Punjab and the Asp and Mr. And all these other great recurring characters, along with Annie and Sandy and Daddy Warbucks. And I just really, really, dug the series. And this was this classic stuff. It's this classic adventure. Harold Gray knew how to keep that pot boiling. He knew how to write without sentiment, but with lots of heart. He was a stone conservative, and which I guess I responded to that as well, being a young conservative and now an old conservative. But just a sense of adventure. There's some bitter humor. There's just a lot going on. You just really get into these characters, and Gray could really build to either a great suspenseful moment or a great emotional catharsis. And I'll tell you, Annie is about the toughest character you'll ever run across in comic strips. Never cross this little girl, because she'll get you. And I think that's what I liked about it, this sense of retribution that this little girl has. I mean, she just never lets up. She never backs down, and she's constantly courageous. And of course, the ups and downs of her and Daddy Warbucks' life. Daddy Warbucks goes from rags to riches to rags and back to riches again more times than I can count. But it's always exciting. It's always interesting. And Gray obviously deeply cared about these characters. He's a very earnest creator. I don't know a lot about his personal life other than that he was a conservative. But a hell of a creator. As far as my writing schedule goes, it's kind of loosey-goosey. I get up kind of late because I stay up too late watching movies and stuff. And I roll into the office like around 10 o'clock. Used to piss them off at CrossGen. You want to be there at 9. It's like, I'm not awake at 9. And I sort of do what we all do, check emails, fiddle around, do this and that. Procrastinate. As much as I love to write, and any writer will tell you this, as much as I love to write, the easiest thing in the world is to not write. You find other stuff to do. I think this room needs another coat of paint. So I'm going to go after those dust bunnies under the bookshelf right now because I don't feel like writing at the moment. But eventually I sit down, I bear down, and oddly, I'll work from like 10, sometimes till 8 o'clock at night. But sometimes I get what I wanted to get done. I mean, my goal used to be 8 pages a day. Now it's five. But working on things like Alpha Core and working for Richard Meyer, I find I can write 10, 12 pages a day of comics pretty easily. They come out pretty easily. And when that's over, I go, well, I guess I've done enough for the day. I mean, I'm my own boss. And being my own boss, I'm a cruel bastard to myself. I'll never let myself get up from the desk. So I'll find a few more things to do and then join the family for dinner. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of loosey goosey. Oddly, and I think a lot of writers will tell you this also. Sometimes if I have a deadline during the day, like a doctor's appointment later in the afternoon, or someplace I have to be, it sort of gooses my writing schedule because like I really want to get some work done today, but I've only got a very limited time. So no visiting Hollywood elsewhere or looking at my favorite websites or any of that. It's get down to work, buddy, because you got to be somewhere later, and you don't want to show up not having completed enough work for the day. But as I said, it's my own schedule. But I'm pretty brutal to myself because I like to stay ahead. So yeah, and I never work on Fridays or Saturdays unless it's really. I might take a Zoom call if I really like the person. But other than that, Saturdays and Sundays, I am off the radar. So it's Monday through Friday, generally, 10, 11 o'clock till, 6 or 8, depending on how the work goes. Ofe, when you write, how often do you pull from life experiences and real stories you've heard? If so, any examples you could talk about? Thank you. The one that comes to mind first is Skywolf. When I started writing Airboy, I resurrected the character Skywolf. He was a Golden Age guy. He used to run around with a wolf's head on his head for a mask. We thought that Tim Truman and I, in developing the series, decided that a lot of artists aren't going to be able to draw that very well because even in the Golden Age, sometimes it looked really cool, and then other times it looked kind of dopey. So Tim redesigned Skywolf's outfit for quote unquote moderate audiences. Very cool outfit it is. But when writing Skywolf, I needed a voice, and Skywolf was a Texan. He was from the World War II period. And I said, this kind of naturally landed on my dad. So in my head, Skywolf's voice was my father's, and he was a Skywolf himself. He was a bombardier on B-17s during World War II. Not only his voice in my head, but things he said. A lot of things that you read that Skywolf says, some of the ones that seem clever or deep or funny, are things my dad actually said. And I would put them in Skywolf's mouth. As far as drawing from life for other things, I mean, when I was on the comic The Nom, I've told this story before, I was reticent to take The Nom on as an assignment because it had been written by Doug Murray, who was a Vietnam vet. And it was being drawn at the time by Wayne Van Zandt, also a Vietnam vet. I was not a Vietnam vet. Never been in uniform. I was missed out on the third draft round just before they ended the draft. Got real close to going, got the physical and all, thought I was going, but I didn't go. So I hold my manhood cheap, and I didn't want to take the title on because of that. I thought, well, who am I to write about what these guys went through? And the Nom was trying to present it as, it wasn't Sergeant Rock, it wasn't Haunted Tank, it was trying to present the war as realistically as we could in a code comic book. And so Don Daly, the editor at the time, said, well, why don't you talk to Larry? Larry was a combat vet. See what he thinks. So I called Larry Hama and said, what do you think about me taking over this book? And he said, you'll do the homework, you'll do the research, and you'll respect what the guys did over there. You're not some, lefty commie piece of trash. It's going to make our guys look like baby killers. So go for it. And I did. And Wayne Van Zandt introduced me to, and I had previously talked to lots of Vietnam vets during my various working careers. Worked a lot of blue collar, no collar jobs. Worked with a lot of vets, and I was always pestering them with questions to the point where I just annoyed the hell out of them. But I got a lot of great stories. And then Wayne Van Zandt introduced me to dozens and dozens of of vets. And I got to hear all their stories and use a lot of their life experiences in this book, because that's the way this book was. It was supposed to be as real as possible. Required a lot of research, read a lot. I could practically speak like a Vietnam vet. I knew all the jargon, all the buzzwords that they used over there. And that's kind of the same approach I took to writing anything military, be it my SEAL Team 6 novels or Bad Times or Levon Cade, which all feature people either currently or formerly serving in the military. And to that end, also when I was writing G.I. Joe, at conventions, I would end up talking to a lot of, young folks, men and women, coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And as I did with the Vietnam vets, I would pester them with questions, and had a lot of great conversations and everything else. Learned about different phrases they would use. The challenge for me is capturing that shared language of the combat veterans. Anybody. I mean, if you're on a college football team, whatever, if you're in a space program, if you're working aboard a ship, you're in close proximity with the same people every day. You're sharing a task, and you begin to share a language. You share jokes and phrases and things like that. And that's what I tried to capture, that patois shared by people in combat. And for the most part, from what I've heard from vets, is I have captured it. Like, I literally had a Marine back from 2 deployments in Afghanistan say that's how we talk. That's how we talk to each other. It's kind of rough. It's kind of nasty. It's real ball busting, but you captured it. So it made me feel good. Now, as far as talking to Vietnam vets and stories I could use in a code book, Rambo First Kill, the graphic novel coming out very shortly from Splatto Comics, contains, it's Rambo's first tour in Vietnam, but it contains a lot of stories told to me by vets that I could not use in a code book. And, these were told to me firsthand by guys who were there and saw the things that I described in Rambo First Kill. Because, again, I wanted Rambo First Kill to be like the Nam comic, as close to real combat in Vietnam as I could get. This isn't, Sergeant Fury. This is real, as authentic as I could make it. And of course, I had a lot of help from the art team, who did just a fantastic job of keeping everything authentic. So look for that soon. First Kill. It's Rambo's first tour in Vietnam. John Rambo. All righty, John Bua. Is there a single issue of your comics that you call your favorite, your worst? I don't know about single issues. It's more about runs to me. And my run, obviously, on Detective with Graham Nolan will always be a high point in my career because of the level of collaboration. I mean, I wanted Graham on this book, not only because we were friends, but because Graham is probably the greatest living Batman scholar in the world. And I wanted that. I mean, I was a Batman fan. Graham is a Batman scholar. And I really wanted him on it. I knew he wanted to be on it. And of course, somebody as talented as Graham and as driven as Graham, when they want to be on your book, you want them on your book too. So, and I think we did some really cool stuff together. And as I said, it was much more of a collaboration than usual when I work on a book. There was no separation of tasks. Graham always had an opinion, always had a contribution to make to the story. Obviously I had no contributions to make to the art, but and a lot of these were plotted together between the two of us, and character design, things like that. There was I did do a few drawings. I mean, I did do a few initial character designs for new characters or rebooted characters to give Graham an idea of what I was doing. But all of that, the fact that we were buddies and we got to work on, our favorite comic book character together, which I still can't believe, for an extended run, for years, we worked on Detective Comics. And I'm proud of the accomplishment. I think we did some really cool stuff, uh, and all within the framework of what we thought would be great Batman stories. Continuing on with Batman, I guess single issue. If I had to pick one, I wrote a lot of Batman, so some of these are going to be Batman. Um, Detective Comics #7, which is Captain Leatherwing. It's an Elseworld story. It is Batman as a pirate. It is drawn amazingly by Kike Alcatena, who is practically channeling Howard Pyle, the great illustrator, who's famous for doing so many great pirate stories back in the golden age of illustration. And everything about it worked. Everything about it was fun, and I really, really dug Captain Leatherwing. Batman Predator 3. This was one of those things where I told before where I kind of had I kind of had my DC editors in a corner legally. They had done something. They had wronged me, and I wanted them to make it right. And unlike most editors, I knew if I wrote down a list of what I wanted and they agreed to it, they would do it. And this was one of them. There was a list, I think, 7 projects, and they all got done. They all got published, and they all made money. And it's not like, hey, let's do it because I want to do it. These weren't vanity projects. These were things I thought would make money, but now I could do them. I had the imprimatur to do them because they had to make up to me something they had done. And no, they did not touch me inappropriately. So anyway, Batman Predator 3 with Jorge Zafino and Robert Campanella was on the list. I mean, I had the whole art team lined up. I knew the story I wanted to tell. And of all the things on the list, this is the one they groaned over most because it was going to provide going to the legal department and wrangling with Dark Horse and wrangling with 20th Century Fox to do yet another Batman Predator. But for my money, not just because I wrote it, or maybe because I wrote it, I think this is the best of the Batman Predator crossovers. Because I think it hewed closer to Batman and it hewed closer to the actual Predator Bible than previous volumes had. And it was a blast to work on. And of course, I got to work with DiMaggio once more. And just what an awesome talent. So this is kind of our swan song. This is our last job together before he went off to Hollywood. And I think he did exemplary work here. Another favorite issue, and we're back to the Nom again. The Nom #66. It's a story called The Creep, cover by Michael Golden, interior artwork by Kevin Kobasic. And I think of everything I've ever written in my comic career, this is the best story I've ever written. It all came out in one sitting. Sometimes that happens for writers, not very often, but it happens, where just lightning strikes and a whole story appears in your head all at once. And everything fits and everything seems perfect. And I just sat down and wrote it from page 1 to page 22 without getting up. I couldn't get up. It was a total compulsion to write this story to its end. And it's this one-shot issue of the Nom, #66. If you ever get a chance to pick it up, I'd be happy. As far as worst comics, I can't think of a worst single issue, but if I did, it would probably be in the Wheel of Time stuff I did. Robert Jordan adaptations. I tried to do my best work on these. The problem is that Jordan's work did not easily lend itself to comics. I'm sure the people adapting it for live action for Amazon are finding the same problem. That a lot of these stories are kind of passive. A lot of the action is internalized. There's not a lot going on the page. Now, every once in a while, there's a big battle or there's a big fight, but they're not often enough for comics. Comics need visual stuff, movement, eye candy. Every page of a comic is an immediate experience. And if you have page after page after page of people wandering around or talking, or in some cases reading, it doesn't fly as a comic. So I had to do a lot of shifting, changing, moving, shifting events around, emphasizing what would normally be a minor event in the story into something bigger, simply so we could have some action or eye candy in the story. So these things were difficult. And I did the best work I could, but there's only so much I could do. So of all the work I've ever done, if I was to point at something that failed, I think it would be this. Although they sold really well, and apparently copies of the trades are worth a fortune if you can find them. System error. A while ago, you were both on JDA's channel, and you mentioned how you're a logistics guy like Mike Barron. I immediately thought to myself, what are logistics? What is logistics? You can get a master's degree in the arts these days without ever using or even seeing the word logistics. P.S. Perhaps you could talk about the story logistics of the Rippaverse. Well, you could get a master's degree in arts and not learn a damn thing, in my opinion. But people always say, what education do you have to become a writer? Read a lot. didn't a couple of years, well, actually a couple of semesters in community college was all I had, and took off from there. All you need to be a writer is a certain level of confidence and ignorance, and I had both. Now, logistics. What are logistics? Well, if you've ever seen a James Bond movie, and who hasn't, that scene where Bond goes to visit Q, and Q shows him all the gadgets that somehow, coincidentally, will be exactly what he needs to get himself out of trouble later in the story. These are where all these gadgets are introduced. This is logistics. This is introducing the science and technology of the James Bond series. How do things work? As well as exploring how James Bond's organization works. There's a hierarchy. It employs a lot of people. It's a global organization. All of these things are brought out in setup here. And this is all pure setup. And most of what logistics are is setup. Now, you might ask yourself, well, who cares? But logistics form a large part of superhero stories because superhero stories are, come on. I know we're all grown-up fans and we love comics, and there's no reason why we can't love comics. But these are written for kids. And they're patently ridiculous at their core. I mean, the idea of Superman is crazy, but that's why we love it. It's fun. It's a wish fulfillment thing. But you got to answer some questions. How does he shave? Why doesn't his uniform get ripped? How's he comb his hair? There's all these different questions. What's Superman eat? And any superhero raises these kind of imponderables, and then you have to figure them out or not figure them out if you're lazy. Through the 50s and 60s, the bulk of the really good Superman stories were answering logistical questions, like how does he cut his hair? How does he keep his secret identity? Things like this. And, him constantly dealing with these complications and roadblocks and obstacles in his life, as well as the every day-to-day life of what is it like to be Superman, and what does that mean? And these are all logistics. I recently had a conversation, a podcast with David Finn about how cool it is that the Fortress of Solitude is only accessible by a key that turns a lock, but only Superman can lift that key. And, basically he leaves the key on the mat. And that's okay with him because he knows no one can lift it. Of course, a few times that has happened, and it's much to Superman's surprise. But whatever, it's still a cool gimmick. And they eliminated it somewhere along the line. And David and I were bemoaning the fact that they would eliminate something that cool, or something like the Battle City of Kandor, or all the other gizmos and gadgets and elements of Superman that, for me, made it a really entertaining book, made it seem like a deep, well-considered universe. And that's all what logistics do for you. Batman is tons of logistics. The Batmobile, where did it come from? How was it built? Where does he park it? If he parks it, can it defend itself? These are all things that I thought about when I was writing Batman and included them in the story. Sometimes whole stories grew out of this. I mean, I wrote a story where the main subplot was the Batmobile defending itself from car thieves. Because of course Batman would have thought of that. You can't just leave a car that cool sitting around a bad neighborhood. And let's face it, Batman hangs around in bad neighborhoods for the most part. You can't just leave that ride sitting there undefended. But there were other things like the Batcopter. I never had a Batcopter until Rodolfo DiMaggio said he loved drawing attack helicopters. And so I put one in Batman Predator 3. Batcopter to me never made any sense because you could follow a copter. How do you land a copter in secret? How do you land a bat plane in secret? Someone would be able to follow you. There's FAA radar. There's simple line of sight. Your neighbors would see a chopper landing in the middle of the night behind the trees. And then where is that chopper now? Oh, I don't have a chopper. Same thing for the bat boat. Graham and I, because Graham loves boating, and we seriously really wanted to have a bat boat. And our plan was to, again, the bat boat makes no sense. Where does he dock it? Boats are easy to follow. They've got to go back to shore. Unlike the Batmobile, where we can assume through speed and guile and crazy driving, he could elude pursuers. It's tougher on a boat because you're stuck on the water. So Graham and I devised an idea where the Batcave extends further down than previously thought to under a subterranean river, and he had a dock down there, and that's where the Batboat was a submersible. It could ride on the surface, it could ride beneath the surface, and we never got around to it in our detective run, but we did introduce it in Bane Conquest. We finally got to do the Batman submersible because that was logistics. That solved the problem that we saw for Batman doing that. Same thing for the subway rocket. Graham and I created the subway rocket, which was a subway accessible from the Batcave, and it left from an abandoned subway platform. And if you know anything about big cities, London, New York, Philadelphia, there are lots of abandoned subway platforms, abandoned subway lines. And what Batman did was, create his own independently driven subway car called the subway rocket that would launch out of this, hidden, forgotten subway platform accessible from the Batcave. And we thought that solved a lot of logistics problems for us because Batman could pop up anywhere in the city without being troubled by the Batmobile. And he could also defend the subways. I mean, how frightening is that for subway muggers and guys who like to push old ladies off of subway platforms to see this crazy, insane looking Batman subway car come roaring down out of the tunnel, at 150 miles an hour. So logistics, hey, you can see logistics are fun. And that was the part of the big fun of me working on any of the titles I've worked on is how does this stuff work? And how does it enhance the story? So I think logistics always enhance the story because it creates a believability, a sort of interior realism for whatever it is you're trying to create. Catwoman was a series of logistics because to my mind, every Catwoman story should, to some part, be a heist story because she is a thief. And heist stories are all logistics. How is this going to work? How are they going to get into the vault? How are they going to escape? How are they going to elude detection and surveillance and alarms and blah, 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 blah. And of course, the whole time the clock is ticking, there's suspense, there's dangerous guards or attack dogs or whatever. And you've got to figure your way out around all those things. And of course, in every grand heist story, everything goes wrong because every great heist story is a deconstruction story. And you got to figure out the logistics of all that. How does that work? The police response. Is there lethal force involved? Blah, blah, blah. And, so heist stories are pure logistics. But even in a lowbrow, blue collar, no collar kind of hero like Spider-Man, there's logistics. I remember when I was a kid reading Ditko's Spider-Man run, and I just love the story where Spider-Man had to, he lost his costume. He had to leave it on a rooftop or something. I can't remember what the whole deal was. And he had to go to a costume shop and buy a costume, which of course shrank on him, was ill-fitting and just didn't fit the bill. And while this was kind of funny, it also lent a degree of realism to the strip. It was kind of a wink and a nod to the audience. That, hey, this stuff's fun. This is probably what would happen to a superhero in the real world. And of course, Spider-Man had to deal with all kinds of other things like, making money, hiding his identity from Aunt May. As Spider-Man, how do you slip into a two-bedroom in Flushing without being seen? And, all kinds of stuff like that, in addition to just simply keeping his secret identity going. And to me, Spider-Man, even though he didn't have a Spider-Mobile, Spider Plane, or Spider Cave, or any of the rest of it, he had plenty of his own kind of homegrown makeshift logistics to work with. And it really helped make the stories more believable because they seem to be grounded in reality, not in the real world reality, but in its own interior reality. And that's what made it work. Now, the same thing for Alpha Core. I mean, for some reason, Eric's placed a lot of trust in me, and he and I are kind of partnered up to build this world out. And I'm currently working on my third project for Eric, and it involves world building. It involves the history of the Rippaverse. And it goes back and tells, origin stories and things like that. It's like, how we got here, how we got to the events of Alpha Core and ISOM and the other projects that we have in the works. And it's all a part of, jumped ahead a little bit. It's all a part of doing what I said before, creating this interior reality, using logistics, using structure, infrastructure, science, technology, and real world events to try to create a believable universe that seems deep, that we can relate to, even though it's all made up. Because if you just start making stuff up and there's no continuity and there's no, continuance to anything, I don't know, for me, you kind of lose interest. If you kind of change the rules, like in the Star Wars universe, they've just sort of changed the rules as they went along to suit the story. Lazy writing. You've got to set the rules down and stick with it, like all the great comic books did. All right. Kian Kurji. I've been reading some Raymond Chandler. So far, I've read The Big Sleep and Farewell, My Lovely. I like some of the hard-boiled detective stuff, but is it just me, or his plots a complete mess? Yeah, his plots are a complete mess. Raymond Chandler, I did some reading on this before doing this. Chandler had been an oil executive. He was a big-time oil executive, making really, really good money until he got fired. And he got fired for fooling around with married women and drinking a lot and not showing up to work. Chandler was a chronic alcoholic. But he turned to writing because he couldn't get a job. It was the Depression. He lost a great job in the Depression. Not the best timing. So he started writing. He started writing for Black Mass Detective, and eventually moved up to hardback novels as, the literati took a second look at him, decided he was worth considering as, some of his books are worth considering as literature, not just detective genre stuff. And of course, because it was literature, those in the know didn't really care about plot. They didn't care about who done it. They didn't care if his stories worked out in the end. And most of them don't. And most of them are weird. I mean, I love Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler is you read it for the beauty of the writing and the humor and the cleverness. His dialogue exchanges are priceless. His descriptions of things like weather and locales, just terrific. Just still read fresh today. And he pretty much created that aspect of the private eye genre, the sort of wise ass, the great one-liners. He had a face like a collapsed lung. She had a figure that would make a bishop kick out a stained glass window. Or my favorite, those drugstore cowboys have all the answers. Just terrific lines like that who knows where they came from. But plotting, he didn't seem to really care that much about. He drew a lot of inspiration from Dashiell Hammett, who was like the hottest thing going when he broke into writing as far as detective fiction. But Hammett and Chandler could not be more different from each other. Hammett is all about the plot, all about things working out, all about resolution, setup, and the rest of it, climax. And I think the main reason for that, and I thought this for a long time, is that Hammett was a detective. He was a detective, and these things had to make sense to him story-wise. That's the way he was built. I think also because Hammett saw life from the bottom up. Hammett came from nothing. to be a successful detective and even more successful writer. Again, another chronic alcoholic. Um, Chandler, as an executive, an Ivy League guy, he saw life from the top down. And apparently, with our nation's elites, life doesn't always have to make sense. And he didn't bother to make his novels make sense. But that's not what his novels are about. A friend of mine recently said he started reading Chandler because of my recommendation, and he started with The Long Goodbye, which is probably the last place. No play on words intended. The last place you should start with Chandler is The Long Goodbye, because it's considered by the literati to be his best book because it is so maddeningly uh, oddly constructed. Because the story is over halfway through the novel, and the rest, it has the longest denouement in detective fiction. So it's aptly named A Long Goodbye. This is the novel that just won't go away. So, but as far as plotting, I mean, you and I aren't the only ones. When Howard Hawks was making The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, he was working with his screenwriters, and they were rather confused over, while adapting the novel, as to who killed the chauffeur, because everyone had an alibi. There didn't seem to be anybody available to have killed the chauffeur. And Howard Hawks called Raymond Chandler and said, "Look, we're having a little problem here. Who shot the chauffeur?" And Chandler said, "Damned if I know." So what are you going to do? But I did, in doing the research, run across this Chandler quote, which I don't know. I should have this carved in stone on my wall. To exceed the limits of a formula without destroying it is the dream of every magazine writer who is not a hopeless hack. If I owned a comic book company, this would be hanging above the receptionist desk. Because this nails it. I can't even say any more about it. This nails it. Think about it. John Bua twin spin. All right, John asks, which character that you worked on was your least favorite? I've never made a secret of the fact I don't like the Joker. I don't like him. I think he's a creep. He's unredeemable. There's nothing to like about him. Even when he's funny, I mean actually funny. You laugh despite yourself, or I laugh despite myself. That isn't to say I don't like writing him. I just don't like him. I like writing him because I love seeing him foiled. Basically, the Joker is Satan. He's just evil personified. Unlike other villains, he has no redeeming feature. And even if for a moment you have an ounce of sympathy for the Joker, it's only to provide him an opening to do something ghastly. So never fall. Never fall for the Joker. Never fall for Satan. Don't be weak. But yeah, I like writing the Joker because I love seeing Batman either kick his ass or, even better, humiliate him in a battle of wits. Because the Joker just thinks he's so damn smart and he's so damn clever, and Batman will always win out in the end. And so yeah, he's my least favorite character, but he's a challenge to write. Mainly, he's a challenge to write because, I mean, you write a crappy Clue Master story, nobody's going to remember it. You write a crappy Joker story, it's going to follow you the rest of your career. So you got to bring your A game when you write this character, because so many people will be looking at it. Joker sells copies of Batman. When Joker appears, sales go up. So yeah, least favorite, but still fun to write. Okay, I'm calling this segment Brick Hard Slab Wants to Know. Brick's got a number of good questions here. First up, did you ever write any of the, I think it was called, Marvel Knights series? What do you think of the series? I run across them occasionally and grab them generally because they're usually cheap. Well, you're not hurting my feelings. If I'm in the dollar bin, I'm in the dollar bin as long as you get it. And really, in the end, it doesn't matter if you pay $1 or $200 for a back issue. I don't get any of that money. So what do I care? Yes, I wrote Marvel Knights, 15 or 16 episodes, issues, I should say. Uh, I was brought on by Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada, and they wanted me to be part of the Marvel Knights universe, but I was under exclusive, my only year of exclusive at DC, and I said, well, that's not up till November. I can't write before then. And both of them said, come on, you can read. They won't know, and the books won't appear till after your contract's up. And it's like, no, gentlemen, you've met the last honest man. I can't break a contract even in secret. I can't do that because DC's done a lot for me. When my contract is up, I will write you some Marvel Knights, and that's how it went. The premise of Marvel Knights was there's going to be all the street level Marvel characters, sort of in a loose ensemble group, a la the Avengers, and they wanted it, streetwise and gritty. I hate the word gritty, and grim and dark, and I didn't want to write any of that. I'd written enough of that. I'd written a lot of Punisher, and it was fine. It was fine. I liked writing the Punisher. Punisher should be dark and grim. But here I had an entree to the Marvel Universe I had never had before. I could pull any character I wanted into this series and use them, and so I did. And I remember at first, Jimmy and Joe were kind of thrown because in my very first issue, I introduced Ulick the Troll as a villain, and it's like, this isn't what we wanted. It's supposed to be like a noirish series, like a crime series, and here you got this freaking troll. And I said, yeah, but I always wanted to see Frank Castle fight Ulick the Troll. Of course, he wouldn't win, but I always wanted to see that fight. How much hell Frank would unleash on Ulick, which he would literally laugh off as I presented the story. And I remember Jimmy calling and saying, look, okay, you can keep the troll, but kind of downplay it. And my next script I sent in big letters on the cover page was trolls with a exclamation point. And Jimmy called me and said, now you're messing with us. He didn't use the word messing. The other thing I wanted going into Marvel Knights was my choice of artists and Eduardo Barreto. And enough said, Eduardo was a fantastic artist. Just one of the, top 5 guys, if I had to pick, that I would work with anytime, anywhere, on any story. And I think we had a lot of fun, but things changed up at Marvel, and they decided they had enough of old Chuck Dixon, and I got the heave-ho off of this series. They're going to bring in another creative team, and I don't think another issue ever appeared after. I mean, we were selling okay. Royalties were coming in, but apparently they wanted to change. They were tired of me, and they moved on to nothing. So, as often happened when I was tipped off of books, they really couldn't find anybody to replace me. So, that's no brag, just fact, as Walter Brennan might say. Okay. Brick Hard Slab again. You're working with Eric July. How big a universe are you working with? I mean, is it going to be a world of its own like Marvel and DC? Or is it going to be different stories set in different worlds? No, it is going to be one big continuous universe. It's going to be one big old place, shared continuity, setting everything in stone now so we don't have any crises or reboots or new 52s or old 48s or whatever down the road. So nothing has to be fixed. It's all going to be set in place from the beginning. And Eric is insistent on that, and I'm insistent on it too, because that's the way I like to work, as I explained earlier in the logistics segment. So we're creating new characters, situations, cities, science, technology, all that kind of stuff. Kind of stuff I just love. It reminds me a lot of when I was on Nightwing and I had to build the city of Bloodhaven from the ground up. I had to build this new fictional locale that seemed real and consistent. And that's what's going on here with Flora Spark and the rest of the Rippaverse. And I'm generally dealing with the ground level stuff. Eric deals more with some of the supernatural aspects of the universe. I'm more, as I usually am, dealing with the cops and street level criminals and things like that, and any kind of military stuff. And having a blast. Like I said, I'm on a 3rd project for Eric, deeply into it and having a great time. All right. Brick is back with any more plans for Winterworld. You know, badgers hibernate. I'm I'm just nearsighted, or is that a European badger? Um, yeah, Winterworld. I mean, IDW brought Winterworld back a number of years ago. I think 2014. Wow, almost 10 years ago. Because there was plans for a TV series, but that fell through. Feature film that fell through. I mean, once again and again and again, Winterworld was brought to the altar, and because of that, um, IDW financed a series for a while. I think it ran 11 issues. That's an oddball number. It ran 11 issues, and you know that was the end. And they reprinted Winterworld and printed for the first time Winter Sea, the sequel, which had been done for Epic Comics but never published. I think you can still find them in hardcover and paperback. Winterworld and Winter Sea in one combined volume. But yeah, and Rara is a European badger because I did not specify when I wrote the story, and Jorge Zafino was more familiar with European badgers, which I think are slightly larger than he was with North American badgers. I had no idea there was a European badger. I should have, from Wind in the Willows. I mean, it's one of those slap myself in the head moments. Yeah, of course, there's European badgers. But anyway, he drew the European badger. And yes, I'm aware that badgers hibernate, but it's winter world. They can't sleep all the time. So they've got to be, you know, badgers, grizzlies, you know, other animals would have had to change their sidereal habits because it's winter all the time. And watching YouTube videos of grizzly bears in Alaska, I find that a lot of the stuff they tell us about grizzly bears simply isn't true. They don't hibernate till really late in the winter. They spend a lot of time getting fat. There's a lot of YouTubes where you can watch live along waterways, along salmon runs in Alaska. And you know, you and I and most of us have always been told that grizzlies and bears of all kinds are solitary creatures, and they don't hang around. They don't form a community. They sort of mate and then part. And watching these salmon runs, that ain't true. I mean, I counted 31 grizzlies. How'd you like to canoe down that river? 31 grizzlies catching salmon together. I mean, some of them shoulder to shoulder. It's like we were told these animals didn't like each other, but they seem to be getting along. Every once in a while, there's a tussle. It's like a short tussle. It's like a schoolyard fight. It's over in like 10 seconds. But otherwise, they seem to cooperate okay. So, you know, what were they teaching us about grizzlies? Nothing useful, apparently. Brick asks again, I can't wait for more Conan. Will you keep writing Conan? I did the first novel. The second novel is out and available through Amazon and Archaven and Barnes & Noble. If you buy from Archaven, you get a free ebook, free PDF file. You can read on your Kindle or wherever, or your phone. Yeah, I was only going to write 3, but I'm playing around with a 4th one. I kind of want to hit, and I've already written a 3rd one. I kind of want to hit every Conan trope before I'm done, and I haven't done a pirate story, and I haven't done a jungle story. And I'm kind of fooling around with a story that's a little bit of both, you know, jungle pirate story. I mean, you can already see it, right? You know, oars splashing in the muddy water, you know, canopy of trees overhead. Yeah. I want to write that 4th Conan novel. But like I said, the second one is available. It's called Caravan of the Damned. And it's one of the Conan tropes where it's a, desert chase. Conan out on the Zurgir with the wolves of the desert. And, the first one was a siege because I just like writing siege stories. Sieges really aren't a Conan trope, but like I said, I love a siege story, so I started there. The next one is, it's got, scary monsters in it. it's a big monster story, the next one. Very, very Lovecraftian, called Pit of the Blind God. And I don't know what I'm going to call the 4th one. I'll figure it out eventually. Ace Mowick. I saw this art book at my shop and was curious if it had art reflecting Jorge Zafino's better work that makes this a worthwhile purchase, assuming you know what specific art is in this book. Also, what do you think of some unappreciated art of Jorge? This is the book in question, I imagine. And yeah, it's worth getting. It's worth picking up as long as they're not going to kill you on the price. Otherwise, go to eBay. I don't think these things are that expensive. But any Jorge work is good work. Even his quick sketches. Here's a few examples of what you'll find inside. Completed and uncompleted sketches. Jorge was a compulsive drawer. He was always turning out on the cheap paper. I mean, imagine the paper, butcher paper. Imagine the paper they wrap, ground meat in, and Jorge would just draw on that stuff, and ink and torture it with white mat and razor blades, everything else. And the book is full of sketches like this, which really just are the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I have Xeroxes of Jorge stuff that's never appeared anywhere that he just did for the hell of it. And you can stick any of them on a t-shirt, and sell 10,000 of them. So yeah, it's definitely worth picking up. As far as underappreciated work, the issue of Savage Sword of Conan we did together called The Horned God. Savage Sword fans were not big on it. I mean, every artist I know loves that issue of Savage Sword of Conan. But, people used to seeing Ernie Chan and Gary Kwapis and people like that. They weren't too thrilled with what Jorge was doing. I think it was, I don't want to say it was too sophisticated for them, but it was outside their realm of expectations. I think the story was as well. But I wanted to tell a story about a scary unicorn, and I could think of only one artist on earth who could make a unicorn scary, and that was Jorge. And yes, he did. It's a scary, scary unicorn, kids. You don't want this one on your dresser table. Okay. If you want to contact me, brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable, easiest way of reaching me. I will never miss one of these. You can ask questions down here below. I'll probably miss it. You can ask questions on Facebook, on X. You can email me. Is the best way. Email me is the best way for me to absolutely read your questions and know that I read them. So I want to thank you for listening. Thanks you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't done so, please do so. And I'll see all of you down the road.